The beginnings of aviation was uncertain, and with war looming over Europe in 1914, the idea of using planes in combat was highly scrutinized by many veteran generals. Though December 17, 1903, brought on the dawn of flight as the Wright brothers successfully flew the world's first airplane, just 9 days earlier, the New York Times said man won't fly for a million years. During the early months of World War I, the once skeptical generals soon saw high potential for aircraft to be used for reconnaissance missions. The Great War was fought using old tactics while new advanced weapons were being developed, and officials soon realized that scouts would get mowed down using tanks and machine guns, and thus began the era of reconnaissance planes. When the British Army asked for volunteers to join the RFC, or the Royal Flying Corps, many soldiers desperate to break the brutal trench warfare looked to the skies and were eager to join. But they were unaware of the fact that life 2,000 feet above the battle in an open, unpressurized, unheated cockpit would not be any easier. Unlike planes today, planes of World War I had no brakes, no instruments, and very bad compasses. Relaying information was often ineffective, as pilots shared reports verbally, and often got lost and had to land to ask people for directions. They even flew low to the ground to follow streets and railroads. At the beginning of the war, British planes were slow and short on firepower. People in Britain believed that an airplane should be designed and produced efficiently under government supervision, and that they should have a government standard airplane. This restricted growth for private airplane companies, and Britain lacked an aircraft industry unlike France and Germany during the outbreak of the war. British aircraft were often made obsolete before they could even get out, due to many delays and factory embargoes. The Germans foresaw an aerial war, and put in more pilot training. At the start of the war, Allied pilots were estimated to survive only a few weeks, with their chances greatly improving as they got more experience. While the Allies relied on anecdotal evidence, the Germans used an analytical approach. Reconnaissance planes were the main use for aviation in the early months of the war, as they would be able to travel longer distances very quickly compared to ground troops. They could also offer a unique bird's-eye perspective to the war below. Though slow and primitive, reconnaissance planes led to great successes for the Allied powers, most notably during the Battle of the Marne, when an aerial recon plane discovered a gap in the German lines. This isn't the first time aerial reconnaissance was used, however, as observation balloons had been used previously, and were never abandoned during World War I either. Balloon crews were also the first crews equipped with parachutes, a luxury pilots never got until late 1918 on the German side. Zeppelins were also used by Germany, until they quickly became obsolete. Without radios or documentation, reconnaissance missions were wildly inaccurate. Ergo, aerial photography was quick to develop as soon as it was discovered that conventional cameras were often ineffective. The pilot couldn't efficiently operate a camera while flying, and having a second person was inefficient due to added room and weight needed. The first side-mounted aerial cameras came from Germany in 1913, and many more kinds of cameras that got steady, clear images quickly developed through the war. Early planes did not have the structure or lift needed to carry anything more than a simple revolver. Few planes used monoplane designs due to the low-power engines available at the time. The aircraft flew slowly, and the wings were unable to generate enough lift. In order to increase the lift without increasing the speed, there needs to be a higher wing area. Modern gliders use long wingspans to fly at low speeds, but World War I era planes did not have the lightweight material capable to withstand the bend of long wingspans. To keep a short wingspan, planes used a second wing. This added a second moment of area, which also allowed biplanes to make higher G maneuvers. These shorter wingspans also created a smaller moment of inertia, which helped with agility. The Halberstadt D-2 was Germany's first biplane, but they also experimented with a third middle wing, like the Fokker DR-1. This era of biplanes and triplanes was largely phased out, as new stronger materials were discovered. The more wings a plane had, the more drag it would produce. Combat in the air was slow to take off, as aviation pretty much only focused on reconnaissance. Pilots sometimes dropped bricks, grenades, and iron spikes at other planes, or carried small pistols to try to shoot at enemy pilots. However, this was highly ineffective. Pilots often just minded their own business, or even smiled and waved at passing enemy planes on their way back home. Letters were even dropped to the other side, inquiring about the fate of a lost airman, and wreaths were even dropped at well-known pilots' funerals. However, as wartime tensions rose on the ground, tensions rose in the sky as well. Dogfights were rare and often very short, but became more common as the war aged. Pilots began trying to throw things at each other in passing, and a Russian pilot even rammed his plane into a passing Austrian plane, resulting in both of them dying. The more lift generated by these planes allowed heavier weapons to be attached to them. On the 5th of October, 1914, a French pilot attached a machine gun to the front of his plane, and after that, machine guns became much more common in aviation. Most were mounted to the front of the plane so that the pilot could operate the gun and reduce the need for a second gunner, and shoot at what he was pursuing. However, this led to the issue of firing into the propeller of the plane. Some pilots tried attaching the machine guns to the top of the wings on biplanes, but it became challenging to fix gun jams or reload. The high unreliability of early machine guns are the reason why they weren't mounted to the sides of the wings like they were during the Second World War. They would be too inaccessible there, and pilots needed to fix jams often. The French tried a new kind of armored prop to protect from bullets, but it caused problems with bullets ricocheting back at the pilots. The British experimented with pusher aircraft, which had the propeller at the back to allow pilots to shoot ahead of them freely, like the British Vickers EFB-1. Perhaps the most interesting solution to this problem was the German synchronization gear that made it impossible to fire when the propeller was at risk of being hit. This was implemented in planes like the Fokker-Eindecker. Bombers, yet not nearly as common or abundant, were starting to see use for tactical bombing. These were hybrids between recon planes and fighters before they became their own class of airplane. In the early years, they were slow and easy to target. The German Gotha G5 bomber and the British Handley Page 0400 bomber were the two most common. Trench strafing missions also became common, but were seen as near-suicide missions by pilots as they often had to fly directly into ground fire. The spike in using planes for combat started to demand more organization for fighting groups and air forces. German airfare reorganized itself under Oswald Bürke and finished in 1916. This brought new bombing squadrons and close air support squadrons. They also introduced Jastas as fighting squadrons. As camouflage was not yet important, many planes were painted vibrant colors, such as the Red Baron's iconic bright red Fokker DR-1 triplane. His entire squadron, Jasta 11, was nicknamed the Flying Circus due to its bright colors. The RFC, or Royal Flying Corps, also broke off from the Navy, becoming the RAF, or Royal Air Force. This was the first air force to organize itself into its own entity. Before America officially entered the war, American units volunteered in France under the escadrille. Even after America formally joined the war, the US Air Force largely existed on paper. Their planes were mostly obsolete, so they used spare Entente aircraft, which were also nearing obsolescence. Bloody April was an Allied offensive against the Germans in the April of 1917. The RFC suffered heavy losses, losing 1/4 of its strength, but the recon planes getting information on the Germans was a victory within itself for the ground troops. After Bloody April, Germans lost air superiority, and the Allies got planes like the Sopwith Camel with a rotary engine, the SE-5A, and the French S-13, which all had twin machine guns. They could finally match the German firing power. Near the end of the war, Germany became increasingly unable to produce planes due to supply shortages. The new oil they had to use reduced reliability and lifespans of engines, and the new Fokker D7s could not reach the front lines in large enough numbers. By the spring offensive of 1918, Germans lacked air power. Little did people know, the rise of aviation would advance drastically through the coming years, as an arms race between nations at war caused technological advancements in various aspects of flight. The war brought major accelerations to the development of aircraft. They were initially made of canvas and wood with metal components, but metal planes became more and more common. The German Junkers J-1 was the first fully metal-constructed armored airplane, and it specialized in flying low. But perhaps the best plane of the Great War was the Ansaldo SVA-5. It could fly up to 230 kilometers an hour, climb to 6,000 meters, and had a range of 650 kilometers. It could cross the Alps into Germany and Austria-Hungary. Other iconic reconnaissance planes of the time included the French MF-11 and British RE-8. After the Great War, aviation was an essential part of all following wars, and aircraft continued their quick developments through the coming Second World War as well. The once doubtful generals and media were proved wrong, as aviation continues to prosper and grow, and it won't stop anytime soon.